This fabulous webinar. I want to thank all of the members of the NIH staff and the National Human Genome Research Institute staff, especially Liz Dietz, for their help and their diligent preparation. The title of my talk is Sex, Gender, Methods, and Outcomes Are Intertwined. It's a statement, really. Let me start by saying that when you say sex, or asking, when you say sex, do you really mean gender sex? And I'm going to give you two examples. First, a quick notion of what I mean by gender sex. Most of the time, the phenomena that we study are neither pure sex nor pure gender and can best be understood using this image from M.C. Escher, in which the two hands continuously write or draw one another. So it's best to think about how those interactions and those reconstructions are going on in real time as we design our experiments. Let me give you two examples. The first is testosterone levels equal gender sex. And this is a study from Lee Gettler and his colleagues, and he compared testosterone levels in men who did not engage in parental care, especially with infants, to those who did care for varying amounts of time. And you can see that in this graph, if you look at morning testosterone in picograms per milliliter, men who do not traditionally engage in childcare have a higher level of testosterone than men who engage in 1 to 3 or 3+ hours of childcare. So this is an example of gender sex in that there's a gender role, and in some families or in some cultures, men play a part in childcare, and that alters their testosterone level. And in others they don't, and that alters or allows a different kind of testosterone level. So you can't just talk about sex, testosterone as pure biology. You always have to talk about gender sex, that is testosterone levels, depending on the gender roles, that behaviors that the men you're measuring are engaged in, or the women you're measuring are engaged in. In the second example, we have, which is bone structure equals gender sex. We normally think of bone structure as something that's, again, pure sex, pure biology. But I want to remind you, for those who don't know this or have forgotten it, that our bone turns over 100% about every 10 years. So it's always growing and remodeling in the culture, within the context of the behaviors we're engaging in. In this first example, we see that Moroccan postmenopausal women wearing traditional clothing that covers arms, legs, and head have increased risk of osteoporosis. That is, their gender combined with their religion. So gender also has to be understood in its context, means that they dress in a certain way that prevents exposure to vitamin D, which is a critical part of the biology of bone formation. Similarly, gender and religion can affect male development and bone development. And in this example, we see that urban ultra-Orthodox Jewish male adolescents have less physical activity because they're studying the Torah inside, less exposure to sunlight, and they drink less milk because of dietary laws. And they also have decreased mineral density in their lumbar vertebrae. So again, there's not pure bone base, there's not a pure male bone, but there is male bone that is structured within the context of gender expression within a particular religion. Second point I want to make, gender sex. For looking at it, methods matter, and I'll give you again two examples. First, when doing this work, let's visualize individual differences. This can be very important and lead us in different thought directions than looking just at group differences. Group differences can conceal interesting data, and suggest misleading mechanisms. The study I'm going to tell you about is by Rosenberg and Sutton Smith, and they developed a scale for measuring masculinity and femininity in childhood, in children, using toy preference. And this is an important scale because it's still used today, somewhat modified, to assess gender dysphoria in gender variant children. So if we draw on binary conclusions from group differences, we see that the scale that they set up has masculinity, a masculinity scale. Males have a mean score that's about twice that of females on their score, and a femininity scale in which males have about half the amount of females. So their conclusion, and think about the words they're using here, was that there are distinctive boys' games, that is one bin called boys' games, and distinctive girls' games, another bin called girls' games. And that these can be used to distinguish feminine males and feminine females, and then address any issues they have accordingly. But what if we actually visualize the distributions of everybody in their study? Luckily, they actually printed their full data set, so I was able to regraph it in the following way. Here, I'm going to just do the femininity scale, which is low femininity of 1 to high femininity of 24. And on the y-axis, we have the number of children in showing up in each scale. Blue is boys, red is girls. And we see again what looks like a nice, healthy, statistically significant binary distribution if we only look at the ends. And we see that at the very low femininity end, we have more boys. We have more boys and fewer girls. We have 30 boys and 1 girl. At the high femininity end, we have 26 girls and 2 boys. And we might say, great, so these are the feminine boys. Do they have dysphoria? What do we want to do with them? But when we look at it this way, we really don't conceptualize the masculinity, femininity very well because we're missing half the kids. And if we look in the middle, we have 57 girls and 55 boys, and we see that they play with different levels of both the male toys, so-called male toys, and so-called female toys. And what this suggests to me is that the way in which we conceptualize masculinity and femininity using these toy scales could be looked at much differently, more continuously, and that might lead us to reevaluate whether kids at one end or another end of the scale are actually medical problems that require help of some sort. So visualizing distributions leads to a different point of view. We look at individuals. Let's look at another example, a contemporary example. And in this case is a study where I've taken the data from Karmazin, Raz, and Smith, who studied 1-year-olds. They gave them 10 minutes of free play in a room with about 30 toys. And they were interested in how often the mother in the room named a toy when a child contacted it. What I did was look at their list of toys and assign them to either traditionally male categories, traditionally female categories, or neutral categories as taken from published literature. Then I counted the number of contacts, and I arranged each individual, child 1 through child 16, on a scale in which I on a scale of increasing playing with male toys. And what we find is that the kids who we might traditionally call male kids or masculine kids based on the largest number of contacts also have, in this case, the number 16 has equal number of contacts with so-called male toys, so-called neutral toys, and so-called female toys. then we can see all of the variability in between. And again, this leads me to say, why are we trying to conceptualize toy play as a binary structure? And really, we're only doing it because we came into the study wanting a binary outcome. And we can fit these data to a binary outcome, but what do we miss when we do that? How do we tell a different story about behavioral variability in individual children? The second point methodologically I want to make is that longitudinal or life course studies are better than cross-sectional. And in this example, I'm going to give you a very brief overview of what modeling bone density as gender sex using life cycle dynamics might look like. We have here, I've divided the cycle up into fetal life, infancy and childhood and adulthood. And you see that I've included that there's bone formation, pattern genes, cell differentiation, et cetera, in contributing to fetal bone strength, but also socioeconomic position, maternal fetal use of drugs, metabolism, maternal diet, maternal intake, all of which also contribute to bone strength. And so at birth, there's a starting bone strength that is built further and is further modified by the gender, sex, and socioeconomic position and culture of the child that we're looking at. And this will include what kind of play in sports, what kind of diet, how are their hormones developing, their bone cell and metabolism, and these have also biomechanical effects on bone development and maintenance. And we can see physical activity has direct effects on bone cell receptors and indirect effects on muscles, which then increase bone strain, which stimulates genes for bone metabolism to produce more bone. Outdoor activity can involve exposure to sunlight, depending on whether the child is dressed particular ways, etc. We have mechanical strain affects genes affecting bone cell cycle, etc. And the same thing is true in adulthood. So whatever adult bone strength we're looking at builds on the previous two stages of life. And here, instead of just plain play and sports, I've put in what kind of work, what kind of labor, physical labor, office labor, etc., what diet, drugs, etc., contribute. So if you're looking at an adult and looking at a phenomenon like osteoporosis, it's insufficient to say, well, this person is a woman postmenopausal, so of course they have osteoporosis. You want to also understand the genesis of this individual's bone development over the life cycle. And this might lead to, in the future, public health measures that start way back earlier in development and don't just wait until menopause and then treating the end point and calling it a sex difference when really it's a gender sex difference. So, third question, what are our research goals and whose knowledge do we seek? First, under research goals, what is knowledge for? I've put this particular slide over a background of a beautiful single-celled organism, Stentor querulus, that I first met when I was a child, looking at pond scum through an old monocular microscope with a light on a mirror that you directed up through the slide. Some of you may remember those scopes. They're just a little bit more recent than Van Leeuwenhoek, but not much. And I was amazed at the time that at this gorgeous ciliated protozoan that would reach out and its cilia would start going and then it would bring water in and it would suddenly contract and then it would expand again. So let's I want to start by acknowledging our love and fascination with our material and our appreciation of its beauty. And not part of what knowledge is for is to feed that love and fascination. But to the extent that research is publicly funded, it has to perform a social good because we need to give back to to the people who are funding us. But for whom is the social good? Who has a voice in shaping goals? Who knows things that contribute to knowledge formation? The jargon term that encompasses these questions is epistemic justice. Whose voices are included and who can be knowing subjects? An important operating principle, I think, is the following, as stated 20 years ago by Judith Butler. Gender sex research should be situated within the context of lives as they are lived and guided by the question of what maximizes the possibilities for a livable life. With that in the background, we can ask who knows, and the first thing we can ask is ask the subject for input and listen carefully. This can be as simple as, and I'm paraphrasing this recent study by Herman and colleagues, that we add to the conversation about gender measurement by testing whether providing participants with an extensive list of gender options and then having them self-select into a more limited group of choices could be useful, could be better than simply starting the study by saying, oh, here are your 3 choices, choose one, or here are your 4 choices, choose one, but rather shaping the questioning by asking the participants help in doing so. Or it can be complicated. In this example from Rippon et al., who made recommendations 10 years ago for gender, sex, and neuroimaging research, and they modeled this with the individual graduating into society on the y-axis and lifetime and years on the x-axis. And they point out that the usual study takes place at the level of the individual with a model for what often is called sex. The chromosomes stand in for that. They could be hormones or particular sex-related, sex-frequent molecules. And then there's an experiment, and then there's results, which are a snapshot, and which offer a very limited and not really subject-informed account of what often the author then calls sex, or they might call it gender but mean sex. Got to be clear about terms. But if we include gender sex for real, that is the ways in which society and the individual body interact, the first thing to do would be to take into account these various aspects of gender sex at the social level, gendered activities, gendered reinforcement, model learning, etc., and to design constructs for measuring these things by first talking to the subjects. This then is a way of recognizing and operationalizing gender sex, that is the interaction between the body itself and gendered activities. So there's a feedback between these two that is gender sex. And if we then add in life course or longitudinal analyses, and I could put in all the arrows here, but just for example of gendered activities, we want to look at lifetime and years or life stages. Is this childhood? Is this pregnancy? Is this postmenopausal? What's going on with all of these activities across the life course? So in summary, we need to recognize and measure gender sex. We need to use gender sex friendly dynamic methods that include visualizing individual differences, studying gender sex longitudinally and multidimensionally, and we need to do just research. That is articulating sought after public goods and remembering that our subjects know things and we can design a better study if we ask them what they know. Finally, I want to say that I've made up a reading list because this is a moment when scientists are taking a second look at sex. And there's a lot of new material out there. The reading list will be made available, I believe, on the website or through this talk. And I've included a special section on epistemic justice because I think this may be a new concept to some of our listeners. So thank you very much.